Hi, I'm Dr. Tyra Seldon, and welcome to this episode of The Write On Show, where we talk about your perspectives on literature, writing, and culture. This week, my guest is Danette Williams, also known as Lena Hampton. Welcome to the show, Lena.
Thank you.
I want to start by sharing a little bit of your biographical information with our viewers. So you're native to Indianapolis. You've lived here your entire life, correct?
Well, kind of. I'm native to Indiana.
Okay.
I actually grew up in Gary.
Okay.
Came to Indianapolis to go to Butler a long time ago now. But I've been here ever since. I've been in Indiana my entire life.
Okay. And so wife, mother, novelist, and one of the interesting things I learned about you is that you started writing very early on. What was the motivation for your writing?
Well, I think I always had an imagination. One of our early games was playing paper dolls, where we literally cut the dolls out of the magazines, and then they had apartment buildings, which were books. So it was always an imagination that was fostered, and I think part of it also was my position within the family. There were, at that point in time, I think there were like 12 grandchildren, and I was 6 years younger than anybody else, and the next one wasn't going to come for another 6 years.
Okay.
So I didn't really fit in with all of them doing their things, so I had to do my own thing.
Okay.
And I just had an imagination. Also, I spent a lot of time with my mom, who would watch soap operas, including some people probably never heard of, like The Edge of Night. So I would watch that soap opera with her, and like my Barbie dolls had like super fancy lives, and it would be well on like VH1 today.
So when did you make the transition from the imaginary world of, basically playing it out in your head and to actually fully thinking in terms of, I'm going to write this out, I want to tell a story?
Well, I think some of the first things that I wrote were still soap operas. In middle school, I was writing soap operas based off of my classmates, as if middle school was not a soap opera on its own. I fictionalized it and made it even more salacious. That's when I first started writing things down. And I think another turning point in high school, two novels that I read that really changed me were Pride and Prejudice and Dust Tracks on the Road, which is an autobiography of Zora Neale Hurston, which Pride and Prejudice was just a story that me and many other women love, but Dust Tracks on the Road is the thing that made me think me as a black woman could do it. And I read Dust Tracks on the Road before Their Eyes Were Watching God, which I think was a unique perspective.
Because most people find out about Dust Tracks on the Road because of Their Eyes Are Watching God, so most definitely.
Well, I think this is one of those things that growing up in Gary, I know sometimes Gary, Indiana gets a little bit of a bad rep, but most of my teachers were black, and I had a really great teacher, shout out Miss Ransom, that exposed us to books. She exposed us to Shakespeare and and Austen and all those things, but also exposed us to not so common things like poems by County Cullen, as well as Langston Hughes and Zora Neale Hurston. And I think that it was her who chose that book versus even choosing Their Eyes Were Watching God, because it was a little bit different, and there was exposure to those other books later on in college and so forth, but I don't think I would have been exposed to it otherwise if she hadn't selected it and made that path for us.
Okay, great. So as we think in terms of your trajectory as a writer, at what point did you say, I want to do a full-fledged novel?
I think I had always been trying to do a full-fledged novel. There is a bin up under my desk that I use as a footrest that has notes and notes of where I was just starting to write or gathering characters together, etc. But I never had the wherewithal to sit and actually do it until about 2011. My cousin posted, I want to say it was like 2 days before National Novel Writing Month started, so it was late October, and she posted that she was going to be doing this challenge to write 50,000 words in 30 days, and I was like, I'm gonna do it. And that was the first time I ever actually completed anything, and it was the first rough draft that I gotten from Once Upon a Time to They Lived Happily Ever After. And I was like, yes, and it was such an accomplishment. And that was actually Jack and Diane, which was my first book, and even then I sat on it for 2 more years before I did anything with it, because I wrote it just for a sense of accomplishment for myself, and it was urging by family members who read it, who's like, no, you should go ahead and publish this.
Okay. And I do want to come back to the title of that.
Okay.
So hold on there for a minute. But Now that you've shared a lot of your story with us, one of the things that seems really interesting is that you gravitated towards romance novels. And so oftentimes when we think about romance novels, to be honest, we don't think about women of color. Like Beverly Jenkins is probably one of the more famous romance novelists, and then in erotica you have Zane. So once you started thinking in terms of the genre that was the best fit for you, did you feel any sense at any point of like, well, maybe I should do something else, or this is unconventional, or did you feel like that's what you were called to do?
I think for me, it was less being a minority in it and just me saying it's okay to write romance, because even as an author or someone who wanted to be an author, I was always thinking that I had to write a novel and that it had to be, you know, something with some gravitas to it versus it being just a romance, even though romance novels are the bulk of what makes money in the publishing industry. And that it's almost like it's a dirty little secret, like I'm not going to read I don't read romances, I don't write romances. So for me, it was getting over that. That was the biggest hurdle, not the hurdle of being a minority in that field.
And let's talk about the use of a pen name. So I did ask you before we came on air, was it okay if I share with everyone? Because sometimes people use pen names for very explicit purposes of not wanting other people to know who they are. What made you opt to use a pen name? Because oftentimes that's not common, at least with a lot of modern and contemporary writers.
Well, part of it was because once I wrote my first novel, and I was still, after I wrote it, I was still wrestling with the whole romance thing. I knew that I would want to write there were other story ideas in me that weren't romance. And part of it was so that I can have, here is romance, and someone who picks up a Lena Hampton novel knows that this is what they're getting, versus someone who may pick up a Danette Williams novel someday, or even some other pen name that I may come up with would be a different story, because I have story ideas from everything from romance to sci-fi to, you know, historical fiction. So
and as you're oscillating between those different genres, do you feel as if sometimes it's difficult to say, okay, this is sci-fi, or this is romance, or this is, you know, maybe something that's more informational or expository in nature? Like, how does your brain or your mind, your creative spirit oscillate between all those different spaces?
Well, I think because my brain is always oscillating, it's just super easy. That's the main thing. And I am a romantic at heart, so it's hard for me to not try to put a love story in those other genres, even if it doesn't fit necessarily. But I'm learning as I grapple with the storylines and the ideas of those and try to get the outline together to not. It doesn't have to be a romance. It can just be a story.
And so let's talk about your first book, Jack and Diane. So the question I've been wanting to ask you for years since I found out about it, is this a nod to Mellencamp's song?
Well, not just that one. Well, part of it was that I'm horrible with naming characters. Like that is my downfall. I will get through the first act of a book and it will just be male lead and female lead.
No names?
No names, just male lead and female lead, which gets abbreviated to FL and ML. So I was trying to think of names, and I think I came up with Diane. I was like, well, what's the name that goes with Diane? And Jack came to mind. And so I was just like, oh, okay, that's what I'm going to go with. And it actually even once I was like, yeah, Jack and Dan, that's perfect. He's from Indiana, I'm from Indiana, which also the next two books are also titles by Indiana musicians. The second one, Babyface and John B. did Someone to Love, and Babyface is from Indianapolis. And then The Nearness of You is by Hoagie Carmichael, who's also an Indiana native.
Okay, so very intentional in terms of the naming of the actual
Very
book.
intentional, and I plan to continue that. And in fact, I call that series my Who's Your Heart series, and I'll continue that along those lines with that series.
Okay, excellent. I do want to talk a little bit more about that first book, because it was a bestseller. So what was it like the very first time you penned a novel that it was very popular? What was that like?
I'm not gonna lie, I cried tears. I sat at my computer and I cried, and then I called my mom. I think I was on the phone with my cousin who helped me along the lines of getting that first book out there. I sat there and I cried to her on the phone. I was like, I can't believe it. It had sold like 20 copies, which had exceeded my expectations. But then when it hit #1, in fact, I got screen grabs of all of that so that I could see. And in fact, at one point in time with Jack and Diane, I believe that I was ranked #1 and Beverly Jenkins was #2.
Wow.
I was just like, I was overwhelmed.
Did that put extra pressure on you in terms of the next piece that you had to write or the next book?
Well, the fortunate part is that since there was such a gap between me writing Jack and Diane and it getting published, Someone to Love was already written. At least the rough draft of it was. So it was already there, and it was just a matter of, it was not complete. There were holes in it. I had a really rough draft, and so it was a matter of just getting it to completion and getting it out. But it made me hopeful that, hey, this next one already have a name, and so now I can get it out there, and it might be easier.
And I do plan on asking some more specific questions about that. I want to talk about some of the themes in Jack and Diane. So obviously it is a story that deals with interracial love, where the lead character, female character, is African American, and the lead male character is Caucasian American. And we're in a space and time right now where some of us are struggling with that. We're struggling with coexisting. When you sat down and you started to create these characters and to tell this story, was that intentional on your part?
Part of it is, a lot of my stories come from what if. And there was a point in time, and I think I wrote about this on my blog, where I had every car I bought would break down and I would be on the side of the road. And it was, the what if was, who would I not want to help me?
Oh, wow.
And my thought was, if someone rode up with a Confederate flag on their car, I would not roll the window down. I would call for help type things. I would, not do that. And so I said, well, what if? And then I also had read an article that said that not everybody who waves the Confederate flag doesn't see themselves as racist, and they don't even see it as a racist symbol. They see it as a party symbol, or that they're a rebel, or that it's Southern pride or something along those lines. So that was kind of where it came from, is not so much that he was white, well, but most black people don't roll around with Confederate flags, so that's kind of what made him be a white character.
Did you get any pushback for that?
I did. The pushback that I got was not so much for it being an interracial romance, because there was actually a big subgenre within African American romances of interracial romances. In fact, Amazon has a whole section of interracial multicultural romances that has several authors, and I have several friends that write exclusively that. But the pushback that I got from Jack and Diane was that her ex, I was painting a bad picture of black men with her ex, even though there were positive black men in the story, such as her brother as well as her father.
So when you get that kind of pushback or criticism, because I think this is something that is important for our listeners to understand, because oftentimes people will say, I want to write a book, especially for fiction writers, but there's always the possibility that your reader's not going to receive your text the way you intended it to be. How did you buffer yourself or prepare yourself for people who may not have been inclined to see the story the way that you just described it to us?
Well, there were a couple of things. One, after it was published, I totally stopped reading any of the comments or even the reviews on Amazon. I had people to do that. No, that being my sister, she would go on and read occasionally and let me know what was being said. But because for me, part of the problem is that if I get anybody else in my head, it's hard for me to write. And that's one of those things that I learned during National Novel Writing Month, when you're trying to meet a word count deadline on a daily basis, that you learn to just write. You stop thinking about, well, will these people like this, or will these people write it, and you just write the story that is being told. And then also there are times where the characters are just in your head and they're telling you what to say and you just say whatever they tell you to say.
Right. And I sometimes tell my clients, don't get in the way of your own story, because especially with fiction writing, there's a tendency for that to happen, because your characters are multidimensional. They take on their own persona, they have thoughts, they have feelings, and the next thing you know, you may have intended the story to go one way and they've decided they're going to go in a totally different direction with the story.
I will get the idea from the story, and then I just live with the story or with that idea, and I live with the characters, and I start to form them so that they can become full characters and not just a one-dimensional character. And even as I'm this is going to sound crazy, as I'm going through my day, I'm kind of envisioning, well, how would they see this and how would they react to this, so that I could kind of flesh this out. And then sometimes those things even make it into the book of like, oh yeah, she would totally say this at this moment, and then I will write it down or type and text it to myself on my phone real quick so that that message is there.
Okay. What is the hardest part about writing a book at the same time that you still have to live your life? You still have to be mom, you still have to be wife, you still have to work, engage with other people, because obviously that's a very complex space to be in, where you have all of these fictional, imaginary people running around in your head, but then you still have to be Danette.
Well, it's difficult, but I try to carve out time. And with the kids, it's easy because I told them, hey, if you let mommy go and write these books, there's gonna be book money from it. That's what we call it. We refer to it as book money. And I'm like, and then maybe you can get a new Lego set. Is what I tell my son. So it's little things like that, and a lot of people in my life are so supportive of me writing, so they understand that okay, she's in there, she's writing, I'm gonna let her write. And it's also a matter of just writing when I can, and I'll scribble notes. I have notes, post-it notes are my friend. In fact, in my acknowledgments of Jack and Diane, I thank the creator of post-it notes, so I can't remember at this time. I looked it up for the acknowledgments because I'm always jotting stuff down, and then I will literally sit and I have a big board where I put all the post-it notes, and it becomes kind of the first outline of it. And I'm like, oh yeah, this is a good quote, or this is a good scene. And sometimes the post-it notes trail and make like a 5-foot long thing because I've just kept writing on the post-it notes. So,
great. Well, we're going to take a brief break, and when we come back, we'll hear more from Lena Hampton. Welcome back to the Right On Show. My guest this episode is Lena Hampton. Welcome back again.
Thank you.
So Lena, we were talking off camera a little bit about what's going on with a branch of Harlequin, where they're phasing out their series that tend to deal with African American writers. When you first found out about that, what did you think?
Well, the first 3 novels were self-published, and I had actually submitted one manuscript last year to Harlequin as well as some other publishers, and I was planning on submitting another one, a different one, but that one made me change in my tracks with that and said that I'm gonna have to decide to go ahead and publish it myself again, the fourth time around. And with that, I did something a little bit different. I'm actually going to do a Kickstarter campaign because publishing a novel is actually, even self-publishing a novel, if you want to put quality work out, is not necessarily cheap. You have to pay for editors so that those little mistakes get caught, and you have to pay for formatting, and a lot of that stuff I was doing myself, and it takes away from time from doing what I really want to do, which is just tell a story. Where some of the things I'll still do, like I like to do the graphic design and I like to do the covers, but other things I can't edit my own novel because everything will still be wrong in there. I will see what I was supposed to see and not what's actually written there. So also one of the things that it made me feel is that it made me concerned because most of the other lines don't have any African American characters. So will that be yet another venue that, you know, black women especially aren't necessarily seen as romantic interest. We might be seen as a sexual interest, but not a romantic interest. And that is something that that's that is, I guess, part of why I write them, is because we like love too. You know, I think there's the whole thing of, oh, well, a strong black woman and an independent black woman, but we like to have someone to lean on, and we like to have someone who smiles when they see us and are happy to see us, or someone whose shoulder we can cry on when times get bad. So it makes me wonder, and we like to see those images of us reflected, and we don't necessarily see that on TV. We don't necessarily see that in the movies, but you could at least escape to books and romances specifically to see that, and I'm concerned that that'll continue to go away, or will Harlequin integrate more African Americans into just their mainstream lines?
So the over-sexualization or hyper-sexualization of black women is something that we often see in erotica. We also see it in a lot of the reality TV shows. It's becoming almost commonplace to a certain extent in terms of when we think of a female love interest or a female lead, she's hypersexualized. To what extent do you think that may be contributing to authors who may be new or younger who are like, well, if I want this to sell, I have to go there?
Well, I think especially in the romance industry, after 50 Shades of Grey had the success that it did, you saw things get more and more salacious, and it's less on a romantic relationship and more on a sexual relationship being the basis of what makes a couple work. And in fact, that's why I decided, that was part of the reason why I said no sex scenes are in my book, that you have to bridge that gap on your own and fill it in with your imagination, which is probably going to be better than anything that I'm going to write for you, especially since I don't use profanity in my books. It's kind of hard to write a chaste love scene But I do think that a lot of authors think, well, I need to out-sex the last sex, and I need to do more than this person, and what's the most deepest, darkest thought that I've ever had, and let me put that in the book, versus concentrating on the story and the characters.
Do you think that for, not necessarily you, but for other authors, and then you can also integrate yourself into this question, that there's pressure in terms of I need to write a book that's going to sell, as opposed to I need to write a compelling story?
Well, I think with the self-published in market the way that it is now, and with ebooks and things, that it's a little bit easier for you to write a story that's just compelling, because there's no publisher on your back saying, hey, it needs to sell X number of copies, or we're not going to sign you, or you're going to have to pay back your advance, or something along those lines. So I think that it's freed up a lot of authors to write just what they want to write. And in some ways, that's even why I chose self-publishing in the first place, is because a lot of, especially romance publishing houses, have so many rules that you have to stick with, that it has to be this certain word count, that it has to be this certain thing. Because I actually had Harlequin reach out to me after Jack and Diane, and she said, okay, well, in reading that there would be some things that would have to change, that like she couldn't be a law student, she would have had to already been successful, and things like that. And it does take away some of the creative control that as an author you like to have to tweak things, and it puts that person in your head telling you this is acceptable and this is not acceptable. And I think that that's kind of gone, because you can just publish it yourself and then let the readers decide. And as a reader, I'm grateful for that, because I've read a lot more books that probably would have never made it past the gatekeepers at publishing houses to get to me so that I could read it.
Do you think there's an element of elitism or classism between people who publish through traditional publishing venues and those who self-publish? Like, I've heard people say, oh, well, you self-publish. Anybody can self-publish. Like, do you ever hear that, or what would be your response if someone were to say that?
That anybody can self-publish, and I've read some of these titles and seen some books that I'm like, whoa.
So have I.
my favorite is Take Me Pterodactyl, which is as bad as what it sounds.
Okay, you have to check your word.
But I think that it's less than it used to be. It used to be just considered vanity publishing if you publish yourself. But with the emergence of Amazon's one of the biggest publishers now, even though most of what they put out is are self-published authors, that a lot of even authors that are traditionally published are now hybrid hybrid authors, that they're both published traditionally and they're self-publishing either some of their back catalog or some of those things that didn't pass muster with the publishing houses.
Okay. What would you say are the top 3 things you learned through your self-publishing process?
If you thought about writing, if you're thinking about writing, that is pretty simple to actually get your book in the hands of in the hands of readers. A lot simpler than it was even 10 years ago. That's one of the biggest things, is that you can do it. There are a lot of books that I've read that are full of mistakes, grammatical mistakes, but are good stories. And that sometimes they put the story out there and then they go back and get an editor once they get some money from going the first time around. But that there's also a lot of support from other authors. I thought that it would, I did not think that it would be as supportive as it was, and that it would be more, I don't want to say cutthroat, but more competitive. That, oh, I'm not going to share this piece of news or advice, or this piece of news or of advice, but it's totally the opposite.
Let's talk a little bit more about the support community and why that's so important. You mentioned earlier that when you're writing, there are people in your life who know that you're writing, so they just kind of back up a little bit or give you your space so that you can actually write. What would you say to someone who may not have that type of support system, but yet and still they want to write, or they have a story on their heart or a book on their heart that they want to tell, but just don't have people around them who understand that process?
Well, even if they don't have people in their life, with social media, you can get people in your life. There are lots of groups out there. Like, a lot of my support system I've either never met or only met once. And there are also a lot of different groups. Like, if you're writing romance, of course, there's Romance Writers of America, and you can join that, and you can even join it where it is just an online group, and you can get support that way. And you can reach out to other authors. And also, I think that's one I know I keep I almost sound like I'm an advertisement for them, but National Novel Writing Month, they do a wonderful thing where, you know, they have write-ins and they have groups within your city, and that's where I've met other writers that don't even write romance. They may write sci-fi or other things, but it's still a community in which I can say, hey, I'm having problems with naming these characters. Can you help me with that? Or can you give me, I need my character to have an illness. Can you tell me something? Like those little things sometimes are the barriers in your way, that though there are people out there that you can get communities on social media, especially Facebook groups that I'm a part of, that help along the way too.
Is there ever any concern on your part that if you share something in a public space, someone may quote unquote borrow it, or the next thing you know, like, that was my title and someone else is using it?
Well, I will say this, I'm very careful about what I share in the public eye, and I'm fortunate that I also have other writers that I trust because they're family members. So I can just go and tell, like, mama, no. Like, mama, exactly. I'm like, well, let me tell you. No. So it's helpful because even my sister writes. She's not published anything, and I don't know that she's actually ready for that yet, but she will be at some point soon. But if I'm struggling with a plot line, or I'm struggling trying to get from one point to another point, I can have a conversation with her, and she basically will know the whole book before it's even written because I've talked it through with her. And even sometimes it's not that she's giving me advice, it's just a matter of talking it through that helps me out. And so you have to find people that you trust. And I was fortunate that I had family members. I also have cousins that write. I have 3 cousins who have published as well. But it's kind of finding somebody who you can trust to share their information with.
So I want to ask you, in terms of how have you used your experience as being a novelist to get other opportunities to get your name out there or to get your brand out there? What's that process been like for you?
That is a process I actually struggle with. I like, Instagram is something that I struggle with as an author because I really don't know how to visualize the stories as much. I'm trying to learn on that, and Twitter is not something I do well with. So that's actually something that I struggle with, and especially I kind of think it was a blessing, definitely, but also a curse that Jack and Diane took off so quickly and so easily that I didn't have to do a lot of that legwork. But it's something that I'm learning to do and getting out there more. And one of the things, and I know this from being a consumer and especially of books, is that the more the people just know you as an author, the more that they want to support you and they want to get your books. So that's one of those things that I'm going to try to aim towards, is getting those things done more. Something else that I am working on doing is I'm going to start, because for me it's all about like the meet cute, as they say, and I'm going to start a series that will be on my blog that is called How We Met, and it'll be true love stories of how couples met, where I go and I interview them, and then I put their stories up of how they met. So I'm going to be harassing all my friends and family members. I've already started with their stories, and I also I'm going to start another series that'll be a serialized kind of story called A Girl About Town, which will be on my blog as well, and it is going to be dealing with current social issues in different ways. I've already done the first the first part of the series, in which she arrives into this really strange and quirky town, and one of the things that they talk about in the coffee shop is they talk about, you know, police brutality, which is not something I could necessarily talk about in a romance novel, but I can talk about it and get various opinions in the story, and those are things that I'm looking at other, you know, looking at the comment section on social media. I know, right? And getting some opposing viewpoints and kind of putting those into the characters' mouths so that those things can be discussed on there, and hopefully that'll help build my brand even more.
You mentioned something that I'm very passionate about, and that's the importance of reading. Sometimes I'll have writers who will say, Dr. Seldon, what can I do to improve my writing? And I'll say, read, and they'll pause and they'll say, that doesn't seem to be congruent. And it actually is, because oftentimes good writers are prolific readers. What would you say has helped you the most in terms of fine-tuning your writing skills and your craft?
Well, that is one of them. Reading is definitely one of them. I started out reading more than I was writing. And while I'm writing, I don't necessarily, when I'm really in the thick of writing, I don't necessarily read a lot, but I read a lot in between. One, it helps me understand the pacing of it, and not even just reading, but also even sometimes watching a movie, I can see certain things that they've done, and even certain literary devices. I was recently binge watching Atypical on Netflix. It's a new series that just came out, and about a kid with autism that
he's a medical doctor, is that?
No, that's a different one. He has autism, and his younger sister is kind of like his champion in school, etc. But I was watching it, and it was hard for me to believe that it was a 30-minute. Each episode was 30 minutes because it seemed like so much was packed in there. And even that taught me the lesson of, hey, you need to make everything count, because they made every second count.
Okay, excellent. All right, we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll hear more from Lena Hampton. This is Dr. Tyra Seldon. Welcome back to the Right On Show, where my guest is Lena Hampton. And we were talking about the importance of reading. And so I want to ask you a question. If you had to guesstimate, how many hours a day do you read?
Just about 1 or so hours a day. But I listen to audiobooks. It probably, on average, I'd say about 5 hours a day. Because I'll listen to it while I'm driving in the car, and I can even listen to it at work sometimes, as well as listening to it while I'm doing cooking dinner or something along those lines, when I'm doing just those regular activities.
As a writer, is there a distinction for you between actually physically reading a book as opposed to listening to it? And if so, can you explain that to us?
Yeah. So as a author, reading a book, physically reading a book, helps me understand my grammar a little bit more, because it's something that I definitely struggle with. I consider myself a storyteller and not a writer, because I think writers understand what a comma is used for, and I'm just like, let's throw them all haphazard everywhere. No. And I think that as a storyteller, you just tell a story. But on that note, that when I'm listening to an audiobook, it is helping me with the storytelling, and it's helping with the pacing, because sometimes I'm listening to them and I'm like, oh, this character is annoying, and I'm like, oh, I have to make sure that my character isn't annoying, or that, oh, that's a really good exchange that they just had, and I need to kind of pace the stories that way, and it helps me with understanding pacing a little bit better when I'm listening to the audiobooks. So those are all things that do help me as an author when I'm consuming other authors' works.
Okay, excellent. And let's talk about your other two books, Someone to Love and The Nearness of You. And what was interesting about both of those is that there's some themes of brokenness and themes of loss and attempts to reconcile things that are no longer accessible to some of your characters. Do you think that that's something that plays itself out in a lot of romance-themed texts, or was that something that you uniquely were trying to grapple with and work through and try to come to some solution?
Well, I think that it's something that is carried out through humans.
Yes. Okay.
And in love is that generally it's two people who are broken.
Sure.
And it's finding somebody else who their brokenness meshes with your brokenness in some way, or that they can help heal that brokenness is one of those things. But there usually are themes to the books, and knowing, especially in Someone to Love, it was getting over the loss of not having people there and having to deal with that, whereas and The Nearness of You was about forgiveness. Forgiveness is something that I actually tackle a lot, because it's something that I struggle with, and I put a lot of myself in the books. Sometimes it's just a little part of, this is how I feel about something, and in some ways it's me and my friends call it keyboard therapy. That as I'm writing and the characters are healing, I'm healing and working through things myself. Okay.
So having said that, where do you draw your inspiration from?
I draw my inspiration from everything and everywhere. I'm always picking up a little bit of this and picking up a little bit of that. And I'll hear something, like I was listening to a podcast about how, it's called How We Made This. And I was listening to somebody's story, and I was like, oh, that would be perfect for this character. That's something that could happen in their lives. Or I'll see a little piece of something on the news. Or as I mentioned with Jack and Diane, it was from me having broken down cars. And I was just like, oh no. Or even in Someone to Love, this isn't no spoiler alert needed. She, the main character, had an anxiety about driving, which is actually something that I have an anxiety about. Hers was a little bit worse than mine, so I can make myself feel better that I'm not that bad. But it's always, I try to draw from myself, and then I draw from those around me, and then sometimes it's just totally pulling it out of thin air. And then I've even woke up in the middle of the night with like, oh, here's a story idea.
And I hope you have a notepad or I literally tell my clients, I said, trust me, you're gonna have to start carrying a notepad with you. I've had people write things out on napkins or little sheets of paper, because you never know when you're gonna find that inspiration, or someone's gonna say something and that becomes a springboard or launching pad for another series of ideas. So go ahead.
One of the things I really like is Google Keep, and because it's a little notepad thing, and I'm sure there are other things, but I like that it also syncs to my computer, and I'm constantly taking notes and in there, and I'll just type. Like I was at Starbucks one day and I heard this lady said, I don't like cell phones because you can't slam the phone down on somebody. And I was like, oh, I got to take that as a note. So I typed that into Google Keep real quick, because that has to go into a story. I was like, that's a good line.
So what are you working on right now?
Well, right now I have 2 manuscripts that I've completed, and I am writing a sixth one. I'm still writing a 6th one, as well as the things for my blog that I'm working on. The one that I am going to do a Kickstarter for is actually going to start off a new series separate from the characters in the Hoosier Hearts series, in which they're actually in a sorority. They're in a grad chapter in a historically black sorority, because that's one of the things as romance authors we all know, and romance readers we know, is that series work where you can have characters that just keep on going, and you can keep pulling from. And I was like, oh, with a sorority I have women everywhere. I can just keep pulling them in. And so I'm working on that, and I can't wait to get it out there. I've had a couple of people beta read it, and they've really enjoyed it. And I use some of the old romance tropes that these 2 people are thrown together and forced to marry, which is something I personally love. But so it'll be really good. But it also I drew inspiration too from some family stories, etc. Not that anybody was forced to marry, but into building the story around those characters so that it's not just a trivial little romance, but there's a little bit more weight to it.
And obviously we're both members of Sigma Gamma Rho Sorority Incorporated, so that was part of your grounding in terms of understanding the nuances of that. So if you were to think in terms of when your manuscript is ready, because it's interesting that you have some that are basically in the gestation period. I like to use the metaphor of giving birth, because as an editor, I think of myself as a midwife. You know, our task is to help you give birth safely, right? So when do you know that your book is ready? When do you know that it's time to launch it?
Well, first I have to tell myself to stop writing it. Because sometimes when I first write the rough draft, there's usually a lot of holes in it. I like to call them even black holes, where sometimes I don't know what to write. And that's part of my writing process that I learned, is that I can't necessarily write from chapter 1 to chapter 20, that I write whatever's coming to me, and sometimes it's various parts of the story. And even with my outlines, I know what is going to happen, and sometimes I don't know always what's going to bridge in between them. And so I write those things that I know so that I can get that part down, because I think that's another part of the struggle of me not finishing so many things previously, is that I was trying to write from beginning to end, and I wouldn't let myself move on to that next part until I had finished something. So once I get that all complete and I feel the holes that I know that are there are filled, I then give it out to other people to read, including my mother, who's also one of my biggest fans, and who will also tell me exactly what I've done wrong. I will give it to a few beta readers to read and tell me what they think of and where they think it needs to get better, or where it's already good. And from there, then I start to do all the other steps of getting it to an editor to help finish polishing it up, and to see any of those other holes that may have been missed by myself or the beta readers.
Gotcha. And for our audience members that may not be familiar with beta readers, can you share with them what a beta reader does?
A beta reader is somebody who, even before it's gone to an editor, quite often will will read the book. It's basically they're reading the manuscript, they're reading the rough draft of it, and it's before it's polished and all pretty and ready to go that they are reading it. It's I think it's a beta is a term used, and I think a lot of industries, I know in the tech industry they call it, it's a beta app, means that it's in the test phases.
And for those people out there, because obviously I firmly believe in having beta readers, firmly. And if you can get blind beta readers, even more so, because sometimes what will happen is that people who are close to us or people who are in our immediate circle or network, they love us and they care about us deeply. So they're going to be like, oh, this is good. There's a tendency not to be as critical. But I would say that honestly, every writer, whether you're self-publishing or going through a traditional publishing company, needs to have another set or sets of eyes beyond the editor or before the editor, depending on your process, that actually looks at it. What would you say has been the most advantageous aspect of having people look at it in process, as opposed to, oh, now I'm done, and oh, okay, what's your commentary about this?
Because there are times where I have given it to beta readers and they said, oh, I like this part, but I didn't like this part, or I didn't understand this part. And then I'll go back and say, okay, let me fix that. Or I've totally changed things. Or actually, even with the Inheritance is the name of the novel, that my next one, that I was like, oh, I need to do an epilogue, because even though it was the end, and it was something that I felt, and it was just for them to confirm it for me. So that's one of those things that's helpful. It helps me make the story the best that it can be.
Okay. And when should we expect the Inheritance to drop?
Well, I am going to kick off the Kickstarter campaign in the next couple of weeks, hopefully next week, and that'll take about a month. And then after that, I am going to estimate that February, just to give myself some leniency, and because I know that November I'm not going to be able to get anything else done, because that's when I'll be trying to write 50,000 words.
Okay, wonderful. So we'll be expecting that in early 2018.
Yes.
Okay. So you mentioned earlier your blog. I would like for you to share with everyone the name of the blog and how they can go and check you out and follow you, subscribe, read it, all that good stuff.
Okay. Well, my blog and website is bylenahampton.com, and on there they has all the links to my other social media, including Facebook and Instagram and Twitter, which I'm trying to get better at all of those things, but that would be the best place to go.
Okay. So you are a novelist, you're blogging, any other genres or forms of writing that you're engaged in?
On my website, you actually can find some poetry that I don't really write poetry anymore. I kind of got away from it somehow. I'm sure I could jump right back into it, but I have poetry on my website, as well as some short stories on there as well.
So if you were mentoring a young writer, so if there's a young lady out there, or a young man out there, because writing is writing, who says, oh my gosh, I love what you're doing, you've inspired me, what would you say was probably the greatest or wisest piece of advice that someone is giving you about the writing process?
To just write.
To just write, okay.
To just write, because as the saying goes, that you can edit a page, but you can't edit a blank page.
Right. Okay.
So, and that's one of those things that I had to learn, was to just write. And you get better the more that you write, so make it a practice of writing every day, even if you're not necessarily writing on that novel or that story. And much like how I'm known for reading more than one book at a time, I also write more than one book at a time, because sometimes I'm not feeling that story and I'll write another story, and that's perfectly okay. And also that the writing style that works for me may not be the writing style that works for you, and you have to find exactly what your fit is, and be willing to change it.
Okay. And I asked you earlier how frequently you read. How often are you writing?
I try to write daily. It does not always work out that way, because I have other creative endeavors that take my time, but I try to write daily, and it's not necessarily always on the same thing. And sometimes I include, as part of my writing, going back and rereading what I've written on other books that are still prior to getting to the midwife. Exactly, that they're still in utero, that I'm going back and I'm reading on those to make sure that they are even ready for the beta reader.
Okay, so I'm going to throw this out there. 5 years from now, where's Lena Hampton?
About 2 years ago, I started a 10-year plan.
Okay.
And that plan was so that I was retired from the man,
okay.
and that I was the man.
Okay.
That I am my own boss, and that I am writing full time, because that is my dream and my goal.
Mm-hmm.
I do want to venture into perhaps writing screenplays.
Okay.
But I know that that's also something that you it's easier if you're in California and in Hollywood. So that is my long-term goal, is to get to doing that. And I don't know. Okay. Slowly but surely, I'm working towards that goal.
Okay. And let's talk about the screenwriting for a quick second.
Okay.
So why screenwriting?
Well, some of the stories that I have, I think would be better, even though usually the book is better, that sometimes it would be better just told as a visual story.
Okay.
And also because I think that my strength lies with dialogue, and that in screenplays it's mostly dialogue.
Right.
So that I can do that. I can just write the dialogue and let wonderful actors take care of all of the expression of it.
Okay. So for our listeners and followers who want to stay in contact with you, what is the best way, besides the website, for them to reach out?
On the website, you can sign up for my newsletter, which does not go out very often, I will admit.
Okay.
And also my email address is listed on there, which is lenahampton@outlook.com. You can always email me.
Okay.
Or I have a Facebook page, Lena Hampton Facebook page, and you can message me on there. Be contacted any of those ways. And I have a Twitter account that I'm going to get better at.
What's your Twitter handle?
Okay.
That might be too much
I need to get better at it. That's how bad it is. I want to say that it's by Lena Hampton as well.
Okay.
I'm not certain of that.
We won't
but
worry
it
about
is on the web. It is on my website what my Twitter handle is.
Well, Lena, it has been my absolute pleasure. You have shared a lot of rich information with our viewers about the writing process, about romance novels, and about your story. And so I just want to thank you for being a part of the Write On Show, and for being, so gracious with your gift. And for our viewers, I encourage you to continue to write on. Until next time, I'm Dr. Tyra Seldon. Thank you.